we've talked about is the stupid tax and then the research tax. So you're either making stupid decisions because you're not doing enough research. And then the second piece of it becomes great. Well, now we didn't want to be stupid. We want to do some research, but we're probably choosing a solution that's either very slow, very expensive, very time intensive for me to manage, or I'm like doing it myself, and that's not efficient either.
All right, folks, we are back with another episode, and today we are talking to Victoria Sakal from Wonder. Victoria, thanks so much for being here today.
Super excited to be here. Nothing better to do than talk about insights and AI and research.
That is literally my whole life, so might as well do it on a podcast. To kick us off, I would love for you to just give us like a quick intro. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do at Wonder, and then who Wonder serves. Like, what is your product, and who do you help?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for better or for worse, research insights is definitely my life. It's been my career, if nothing else, for the last 10 years, which means it's been the better part of my life. But I started, at Kantar in the primary research space, moved on to Morning Consult, which was disruptor of Kantar, and then, through a few different roles, have basically spent my time figuring out how and which data and insights you use to then make strategy, brand, business, go to market, product, all the important types of decisions. So now here at Wonder, we are an on-demand desk research platform. So not the primary space, but more data, research, information, sentiments that exist already out there, and they just have to be, yours for the taking if you can go and collect them and mine them, which I know, exactly something that you guys are all thinking about as well. We tend to work with Fortune 500, the MBBs of the world, FAANG companies, looking basically to inform what do we need to build, who should we be serving better, what are their needs, and what's the best way to either create this or build this or market this and get it to market. So all stages of what we call the innovation pipeline, not our term, but something that we orient heavily around. And helping customers, again, start with what's already known out there. So when you're doing primary or you're making even early stage decisions, it's not just based on gut or a hippo or your best, hope, fingers crossed, toes crossed, all the things.
That's awesome. So I think the first place I want to start with this is you are working with Fortune 500, and when you are working with these firms, are you working with internal research teams at their firms, or are you working with people on the product side, or kind of who is it that you're working with?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a few different divisions that we tend to support, one of which is research and insights. It's also innovation, strategy, corp dev, corporate strategy. And, in fact, to a little peek under the hood, one of the big questions we had coming into 2024 was, should we be focusing on a certain job title or function within these different organizations? Or is there another way we should be thinking about targeting, segmenting, just ultimately helping our audience? What our research showed us is that across all of those different types of functions I mentioned, call it the 80-20, but at least 80% of what they're trying to do and the questions that they're trying to answer are the same. And the challenges they have with those types of questions are the same. And so where we might talk about, how you're currently struggling with doing research a little differently to someone who's literally on a research team versus someone who's evaluating different options for M&A on a corporate strategy or corporate development team, ultimately it became very clear that across that full innovation pipeline, but also specifically the first half, where to play, how to win, who to serve, what should we think about as a solution, you're looking at basically the 5 C's. We don't know what our competitors are up to. We're trying to figure out what our consumers' needs are, what else is going on in the category, and headwinds, tailwinds. There's an element of our company in that broader context, and that will tend to come from internal data where any company we're serving needs to use it. It's not necessarily what we're helping them with. And then, of course, the last bucket of broader context and the culture and the trends that might be impacting any of those different spaces. So it's a good question in that there's definitely certain functions that we tend to align with, but all of them are struggling in some way with either a better or faster or more accurate or more efficient way to get insights on any of those C buckets.
So the reason I ask, we're going to go into getting buy-in for the research process about 5 minutes into this podcast, and then I want to get into some of the faster, more agile methodologies that you just mentioned. But when you're working with these customer personas, these teams who kind of sit at that front end of the innovation pipeline, what is it like when you're working with them? Are they already bought in? So when you start those conversations, they're like, "Hey, look, we know we need better research, deeper research. We need more structured research cadence." But then they're getting stopped maybe somewhere down the line with someone who thinks, "Oh, actually, we do research like once a quarter. We run that survey, and like that's our research." So I'm curious because it's a theme that comes up over and over again is how do you facilitate that buy-in? So I'm curious if the folks you're working with, are they bought in, or are you having to kind of nudge them along, or are you having to work with them to then go to someone sort of above them or elsewhere in the organization to help facilitate some of these research programs?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first, core set of bucket of people that we're helping and working with are the ones who either come to us or, when they answer the phone and we describe what we do, are immediately like, yes, this is a pain point. My team is wasting too much time. It's not a great use of, our degrees, let alone our budget and our sanity to be basically sitting on Google. There's the second bucket is then we think we're good. We think we're doing this pretty well, or like, we don't really see what's wrong or needs improvement here. Where our conversation then tends to go from, well, you're either not doing any of these different types of research. So you might not even be monitoring your competitors because we just don't have time for that. You might be doing it, but are not doing it well. And our research revealed for us, a lot of people say we do this here, but then you poke a little harder and they're like, yeah, I would rate us a solid C on that. There's much more that we know we could be getting, but we get by. So there's, the 0 to 1, we don't do it, we need to start doing it. There's a 1 to call it 100. We're doing it, but we could be way better or way more efficient, or just not spending our team's weeks of time on it and just getting it a lot quicker. And then there's like, we're getting this information, but there's so much more we could be asking or doing, where we could be at a quality level, but there's different dots we could be connecting, or just harder questions and more questions that we could be asking. And so that middle tier is pretty interesting for us as well. It's a longer conversation in the buy-in side. And then there is actually I would call it a very small bucket, but there's some teams and some organizations that for us, they don't do desk research. They think primary is the only way, and we don't need to look at anything else that exists, because that's just, it's like the definition of innovation is if you're looking at something that exists, you're not innovating. Whereas our philosophy is, well, yeah, but you have to create the like n-1 of that, or the inverse of it, to say if it exists, we need to know so that we do not do that exact same thing, versus, we're just operating in a silo here. So hopefully that breakdown helps.
Oh, it really helps, and I think it tees us up perfectly to talk about some methodology. So I really like what you said. That's actually the first time I've heard that kind of pushback of, well, we only do primary because we're innovators, and if it's out there on the web already, that's old news, right? We want the freshest, like latest insights. And I love how you kind of flip that on its head, and it's like, well, if it's out there, well, shouldn't you need to know about it, right? So that's incredible. I would love to hear when it comes to methodology. It sounds like you have a very agile approach to research. So tell us a little bit about how you approach desk research on demand. And I assume you're trying to deliver insights very quickly to these clients. So tell us a little bit about how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say also in acknowledgement of what we are just talking about is desk research is far from the only way you should be doing research, let alone the final answer on any of it. It's just, an important part. It'll save you a lot of time and energy. But with that in mind, then someone will come to us with any type of question, generally aligning with those buckets we talked about. And basically what we've done, and I'll speak to the AI kind of evolution of Wonder as well, because it's been an interesting exercise taking Wonder, which was purely a human, capital business, where you come to us and our researchers do all the work for you. You're basically just outsourcing to our team of very talented researchers. Around the time I started in April 2023, AI is hitting the scene. We knew technology is going to be taking off and transforming this space. The question, of course, arose, are we now just going to outsource everything to AI and no longer need humans? Our answer is actually you need both. But what we did is took a look at the full process from I have an initial question to let's scour what we can initially find to we can't find these certain types of answers and we need to triangulate or get creative to now how do I create recommendations or synthesis or this so what an implication kind of summary for the client on this to delivering it and creating visualizations and all that. If you look at all of those different steps, there's certain pieces where AI can definitely help accelerate, make things faster, cheaper, to your point, lots of efficiencies to be gained there. And there are certain steps where AI is certainly not there yet, and jury's out if it will ever be there. Things like triangulating, market share and market sizing. It can get close, it can get creative, it can have suggestions, but there could be certain assumptions that you don't agree with, or that a human brain will think of that AI won't. But with that in mind, so you'll submit your question, and the first place where we've incorporated AI based on human expertise is in this chat interface where you go to an LLM right now, and it'll be off to the races, right? I just need to give me a roundup of all the conferences in the US that are talking about research. Great. That here's 15 and that's it. And I have to say, what else? Or I have to say, what about strategy and innovation or strategy and research? I really provoke the thinking. Whereas we built a clarification engine that the way a human or a consultant might say, you sure you don't want to look at North America instead of just US? Are you looking at smaller events as well as conferences? Are you looking at last year and this year? What's on deck for 25? So just kind of adding a little bit more of a twist to it. And then, yeah, our AI will go and scrape what's available and possible, that exists in the domain of answering the question, provide a much more hearty roundup. But then our humans will go and verify everything and then also augment, use the context you provided in the initial chat. Here's what I'm looking to use this for. So by the way, you keep that in mind with what you come back to me with and, deliver this full report. But to your point, again, it's usually a matter of hours instead of you or I sitting there Googling or LLMing and then verifying for days and days.
So there's a lot there that I want to get into. One of the themes is going to be around primary versus desk research, and I know you were very clear about, hey, it's not one type of research to rule them all. It's you need both. I'd love for us to dig in a little bit to kind of the benefits and trade-offs of the two, and then the AI piece is obviously huge right now, and so I'd like to tackle that. But first, let's spend a little bit of time tell me how you kind of conceptualize the trade-offs, the benefits or drawbacks of taking maybe more time and more cost to execute like a primary research campaign, and how do you weigh that against what you can do with especially AI augmented desk research that's delivering results in hours instead of days? How do you kind of capture the value proposition of that for your customers?
The main distinction that we think about is the what versus the why, where primary research is always going to be very helpful from a why perspective, sometimes uniquely so. But when it comes to why a consumer cares about something or is struggling with something, there might be some commentary in a desk research capacity, but if you as a company have a given solution in mind or your given category in mind, there's a nuanced conversation that has to happen there. Whereas what exactly is happening? What are people saying? A lot of that can be scraped publicly. But again, it goes to sort of like the known knowns, the things that someone else has asked, maybe not a perfect exact replica of your phrasing of the question, but someone else has asked something that will be tangentially relevant to whatever this problem or solution space you're thinking about is. But when it comes to the nuance, to the tailored, context or question or solution, and it comes to the why and understanding those multiple layers and motivations and the really human side of things, of course, that's where primary is going to shine. The other piece to think about is, when it comes to the innovation and the solution that you're thinking of bringing to market, again, you start with the foundation of what already exists, what's clearly not meeting the need. We figure out what the unmet need is. If you're testing a solution that doesn't exist yet, then that's where the primary piece is going to be really powerful because you're wanting to get a reaction to something versus just averaging whatever's on the internet already. There is no reaction because it doesn't exist. But that's the main distinction that we see to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about when you're going out to source these insights in a desk research capacity. Where are you looking? This might, I mean, the the high level answer is probably on the internet. But I guess what I'm curious about is like, what types of data are you digging into? You mentioned like, hey, we can go and scrape. Here's all the conferences happening in your industry across North America, for example. Um, but what are the other types of data that you're trying to pull on and like essentially aggregate to produce those insights? Because there's so much richness out there on the internet. Like, we've been doing a lot with like social comments. Like there's actually like a ton of stuff you can learn if you're able to like aggregate and kind of explore social comments. Like that's a gold mine right there. So I'm just curious, like what other kind of gold mines have you discovered in the corners of the internet?
Maybe a helpful way to think about this is, I mentioned before this whole assembly line that we broke down and we were thinking about AI versus humans. And the way we think about it, you could even use the analogy of like cooking a meal that you can have, whether you think of just like the plate of, I don't know, chili or, whatever it is you're serving or the full meal, every single ingredient in there has a supply chain of its own. So if you're using, I don't know, bad beans, but the rest of it is organic, like that doesn't help anybody or, whatever the analogy extends to. So basically, when we thought through all the steps that we're following, one of these pieces is what are the sources we're turning to? And you or I or anyone listening who's been Googling for these types of answers for years, you can open up 50 tabs that might answer the question for you. X% of them are going to get closed because you're like, this is a BuzzFeed article. Oh, this person clearly works for this conference or this, vendor. And then we get another percentage of them that we have to go verify and double check or check the recency or the site isn't even like working, which is a whole other red flag. And then there's the bucket of sites that are like maybe helpful, but you're having to cross and intersect. And then maybe something that was always interesting is like, we're in marketing. A lot of people will turn to Adweek as like the top source for things. Adweek isn't always the most like strategic or robust analysis of anything. They're often influenced by sponsors and other motivations. So there's this other layer of not only what is quality and what is credibility and what is recency, but what is relevant to a given industry. And so we've trained our AI as much as we've trained our humans to say, financial services person is coming to us. Here's sites we're definitely not going to use. Here's sites that we might ask them or, be on the watch for if they say, include this, don't include this. And then here's also the niche ones that we know might be really relevant and helpful. And that applies as much on the publicly available side as it does on the proprietary database side. So more and more we're plugging into things like Crunchbase, PitchBook, and the like. So that's more relevant for certain use cases than someone who's coming to us for an analysis of marketing spend. But more and more that we can incorporate these different data stores as well as whatever's publicly available. That's how we think about solving it.
I think that's really cool because it parallels a theme that we're seeing with AI, and we can get into the AI discussion in a second here, where with the advent of chat-based LLMs, we realize that we can actually go and get the answer that we're looking for more so than we can get the sponsored content or the 10 blue links or anyone who's ever Googled a recipe, you got to scroll all the way to the bottom to actually find the dang recipe, right? And so what I'm seeing is like this parallel of people want to leverage the vast amount of information on the internet for research purposes, and they need help and they need expertise to help them kind of aggregate, like essentially assess the quality of that data, kind of filter out all the noise, aggregate it, and then help them derive the insights. And so what it sounds like is, you are doing that with a combination of AI and human in the loop. Am I on track so far?
Yeah.
Perfect. Um, Tell me a little bit about the human in the loop component, because something that I believe very strongly and we talk to our customers about all the time is that AI by itself can't get the job done in many cases, where if you just throw the AI out there in the wild, you're like, go get me this answer. It might come back with a low quality answer. It might just make up an answer. It might not give you what you're looking for at all. And so having that human in the loop, the human expert in the loop, is absolutely crucial as we start integrating AI tooling into the research process. So tell me how you think about that human in the loop, the AI augmented researcher in today's day and age.
Yeah, I love that expression. We've kind of generally termed it tech enabled. Not we've termed it. I'm sure someone else did before us, but tech enabled services is another version of AI augmented. Insert researcher or innovator or whatever it is there. The sort of supply chain, or maybe like the flywheel that we tend to think about, is again, we started with a fully human effort here. So we took and broke down that full, set of sequences and steps that we took to go from question from a client to the deliverable in the client's hands. And we figured out where AI could plug in. So certain pieces of it for us, we said humans are unique here. Humans are better here. And so we're not going to put any AI, or we're just going to superpower our humans, and still have them involved. The other piece to keep in mind is part of our human in the loop assertion is that our clients get our results, and they are also playing a human in the loop role. They have to analyze and figure out, so what, now what, then what, who am I involving and shaping this with? What do I need to repackage these results into what format for my CEO versus my head of innovation versus my marketing partner, or whatever it is. But I think the like interesting piece here is when you think about the level of nuance or insight that a human conversation can pick up. We even see this on this intake step where I mentioned we have a clarification engine that will ask clarifying questions. There's a little bit of a UI. We even have thought about it in terms of like the UI of the conversation. Or am I going to sit here and chat with this helpful, maybe bot, but for 15 minutes asking me all these clarifying questions? And yet I'll hop on a call with someone and, I can just basically voice dump. Here's my context. Here's what we got dumped on my plate this morning. Here's 3 things I'm thinking about. And I, feel heard. I feel confident that my research is going to meet those needs. But there's a human element to me, conveying my information. And even on a call yesterday, it's with, consultants who are looking to track a certain category that their clients are in. And I happen to have been an ex-consultant and know that sometimes clients will be like, "Oh, we think we're gonna like build this new thing in this new space, and suddenly you need to add this whole other category to your tracker." And that's a question that would AI have necessarily picked up, or would I have had to work through 15 minutes of random questions where 99% of them are irrelevant, but the one, is actually relevant? That's where there's magic in the gray, and that's where the conversation and the understanding and the like nuance really shines. So yeah, I mean, I totally hear you. It's a tool in the toolbox. It can accelerate, it can make things faster and more efficient, but when you get to a point where differentiation needs to happen or relevance is really key, the human, I feel like, is not really going to go away. I'm curious for a future if we ever can replace that, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as like, to what extent can we use AI to extend uniquely human capabilities and abilities, rather than how do we use AI to basically make a non-human replacement for those capabilities, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And so
Hmm.
your example of like even that little onboarding chat, in that context, it makes a lot of sense. You're essentially trying to do like a little discovery call with that person, and kind of understand their pain points, their context, and there is probably a threshold below which you can use that chatbot for something like that, or if you're trying to operate at massive scale. But for that one to one, I think you and I both agree it's like you can probably just get that just as easily out of a 15-minute call with that person. Um, One thing that comes to mind when you're sharing this is I was talking to a customer yesterday, and I'm interested to get your feedback on this. The way they're kind of conceptualizing AI is they want to give their experts who have all the context on the research. They essentially want to give them superpowers. So they're not saying, "Hey, we actually want this to do all the work of these experts from end to end," or "We want to replace this entire function and automate it away." They're looking for the flexibility to basically use these tools to augment those folks so that they can explore the data more deeply, explore it faster, turn insights more quickly for their clients. Is that kind of how you think of the value of AI tooling in the context of research, or do you have maybe a different perspective there?
I think it probably comes back to that. mental model we used for our supply chain where it was you're replacing or delegating. You're totally saying, AI, take this, do this. This for us, that's basically the initial scrape of whatever's out there instead of me opening up 50 tabs and then thinking of another permutation of the search term and opening up another 50 and going through and collating. AI can do that in seconds, and it literally does. And it's, also again, tailored to the type of question our clients are asking and sources that we know are more or less relevant. So, there's again the smart pieces from the human context that you infuse into the AI, but you can totally delegate. There's augment, so where it can take it part of the way there, and then I pick up the baton and finish it from there. And then there's pieces where it's like leave it be and let it stay with the human. So yeah, I mean, I think this is where the question comes around: where will humans be, as where will research as a discipline or any of these innovation strategy functions be as a discipline? And there are going to be new skills needed, but it's not to say that we're going anywhere, because actually the value of research has always been, what do I do with the information? What is the insight? And how does it relate to what is the unique insight that no one else is seeing that I am, because I asked more questions and I got better data and I talked to a super, specific segment of customers that my competitors didn't think to, who have this ungodly need that opens up a whole new market category, whatever. That's where the value has always been. And that's where we just move away from this end of the what and the commoditized just data collection, and we move into the synthesis and the analysis and the implications and then the future thinking. We just kind of elevate our own roles. A long-winded way of saying I definitely agree with what your clients are feeling. I think that how we make this happen is a little probably trickier than the three sentences, but yeah.
Yeah, that brings up another topic that I'm interested to get your perspective on, because you're kind of talking about the commoditization of data, and a lot of the folks that we talk to, they're like, yeah, a lot of people, like a lot of firms out there, they have access to the same like huge pools of data that we do, and so we're looking for edge, right? And I
Mhm.
assume, when you're working with some of your clients, it's like they're looking for edge. They're trying to innovate. They're trying to create a new category, what have you. And so I'm going to ask this really simply, and then we can elaborate on it. But like, when it comes to research in 2024, where are people finding edge? Like, how are you helping your clients find an edge when so much of data and massive national, international like surveys, all that stuff, it's become very commoditized? So yeah, where do you kind of eke out that edge?
It's a great question also because the edge is it's moving forward, right? Like with everything, now anybody can increasingly mine social, where that was like super niche 5-10 years ago. Only certain companies could even do it, let alone certain brands were even thinking to do it. So that's an important distinction, that staying in, I've talked a little bit about the red queen effect, where if you're just keeping up with your competitors, you're actually behind. You're not even outpacing them. So we're still at this stage of like, we have to catch up and get into, everyone should be using social data, and if they're not, they're like setting themselves up for failure or to be 10 steps behind. But then the other piece for us comes in terms of cadences, where you mentioned this at the top of the conversation, that typically we've got a quarterly scan of our competitors, or we do a refresh on the brand tracker, and some of those things don't need to happen more frequently. But if we go back to the very simple C's, which have survived the test of time for a reason, are you getting always on insights on some of those things? Are you able to act on the random questions and ideas that you have that historically it's like, that's an interesting idea, and it goes to die as soon as we all exit the Zoom call, because no one has time, no one can raise their hand, no one even knows the can of worms that idea is going to open when we start opening the Google tabs or whatever. So the more and more that you can figure out ways to get agile insights that are at some level of fidelity you need to say, this is a go, no go idea, or this is a go, no go decision, or this is a go, no go strategy, right? Each of those different stages are going to have different levels of quality and relevance and fidelity needed. Then you can start, being a little bit more competitive and strategic. But I think more and more what we're seeing is that there's so many companies who are just not even asking some of these important questions. They're not even watching competitors because it's too hard, it's too clunky. We've got a good enough, okay, half-ass solution in place, that actually becomes where, do you have this robust engine? And then can you actually synthesize things and action on it? But it's not just quarterly. it's not just as you have a random question, it's also in between. And that feels where it's been really differentiating for our clients.
That's one thing that has never ceased to blow my mind is just the cadence of research. And it's not across the board, but I've done enough episodes of this podcast and talked to enough folks in the research space who they're running into these walls of, oh, we refreshed our brand tracker last quarter, we're doing just fine, or we did that survey in the first half of the year, and that's probably good until 2025, right? And I'm just over here. I'm like, do you know what people have said about you in the last 24 hours on social? Do you know what your competitor did last week that you're going to find out about next year in your
Hmm.
survey?
Hmm.
And so the cadence piece is just like so critical. And I think that there's a lot of noise around AI tooling in research. People are rightfully skeptical. Uh, but I think the velocity of insights piece is going to be non-negotiable. It already is non-negotiable. And then on a go forward basis, it's going to be, what are you learning? How often are you learning? And how well are you learning? And in all these different dimensions of, what people think about your product, what your competitors are doing, how your category is evolving, all sorts of things like this. So I think the cadence piece, we're very aligned there. That I think that it's kind of like a linear. Like, I think research is only going to go faster, not slower, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
moving forward. The
Do you
the other
see in
piece,
your clients, so I'm curious with who are coming to you and realizing that they have this need, is there a different like culture or mindset or maturity that they're coming to you with? Because I think the risk, I am obviously 100% aligned with you here. The risk is twofold. First is that you get some blip in the, EKG, and you're like, oh my God, we have to go do this, competitive campaign because something just happened. Whereas there is the argument to say, well, in a quarter, we'll see if people even care or even remember that thing that happened. And I lived this at the beginning of the pandemic where companies were freaking out about all these things to say and do. And, in a quarter doesn't matter. And then there's also the element of like, you have to be able to internalize, you can get faster and quicker and always on insights. But if your team is going, with chickens without a head, and you don't know how to act on it, or like how, what's the thing here? And now how do I get more agile with my OKR that I set back in January that I still have to execute on? There's some sort of like cultural or philosophical tension there. I'm curious how, if your clients stand on a more end of that curve.
yeah, it's a super good question, and hopefully my answer isn't going to sound like a cop out here, but the nuance to this answer is we are primarily, at the moment, serving market research firms. And so they are not like it's essentially their end client who
Hmm.
is having to wrangle, like, oh, we actually have insights coming in every month as opposed to once a quarter now. How do we kind of aggregate that and then action on it within the organization, right? And I'll say, as a compliment to the folks we work with, the consultative capacity in which market research firms work with their end clients to help, build essentially like the company brain of insights so that, all the correct teams have access to it. That's where they do a lot of really great work. But then what I can tell you from our perspective in terms of the demand that we're seeing, uh, qualitative research is blowing up. I
Hmm.
think people have, and this is with respect to the market research firms that we're talking to. I think people have kind of gotten the message that, like, hey, it's like I said, everyone kind of has access to like the same sets of like quant data. We're telling people, a high level, kind of view of what people are saying. Do they like this? Not like this? It's kind of commoditized at this point, and so these firms are really leaning into like the qual aspect, and then it's being able to do qual quickly. And so that's been the hang up over the years is basically, I don't know, the last 5 customer calls I've done, people say, yeah, we always run these survey open ends, but no one ever really answers them. And then going through them, it's like a total pain in the butt. It's a huge time suck. And basically what we get out of it is we get one nice little verbatim quote. We throw it on a PowerPoint slide somewhere. We show it to, the client once, and then it goes to die basically. And like, that's like qual, but then a lot of the firms we're talking to now, they're realizing, oh, we can actually, if we can do this at scale and actually get high quality data coming in, that's the huge unlock, because that's where we're able to get these more granular, um, uh, guy I talked to recently had a really good phrase for this. He's like, we want to add emotional texture to the data. We want to add like that human element, right? And so realizing that you can do that, it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, and you can actually deliver that really quickly. That's been like the huge light bulb moment for the firms that we're working with. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. Part of it is like, hey, making sense of all that is like kind of on the end client, but in terms of like collecting that data, I think that's where like we're seeing a lot of interest, and a lot of research firms are really innovating quite a bit.
Yeah, makes sense.
Um, let's see. We are getting ready to wrap up here, but I wanted to kind of give you a chance to maybe share if you have like you could either call this a hot take or just like a message that you kind of want to get out there in terms of uh, when it comes to the research space in general. Um, I would love to hear it, just because you sit in this really unique space where your desk research, you're AI enabled, you're super agile, you're working with Fortune 500. You just have this really cool and unique perspective on the industry. So if you have like a either words of wisdom or a hot take, whatever you want to call it, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think it probably sits at this intersection of, what we've talked about is the stupid tax and then the research tax. So you're either making stupid decisions because you're not doing enough research, you're trusting somebody's instinct, or going on, a smidge of data or an N of one that some customer said and you're running on it and you're just making ill-informed decisions potentially at the cost, especially for the companies that we're working with. One little smidge of a movement can cost you millions, if not billions of, mistakes. And then the second piece of it becomes great. Well, now we didn't want to be stupid. We want to do some research, but we're probably choosing a solution that's either very slow, very expensive, very time intensive for me to manage, or I'm like doing it myself, and that's not efficient either. So when you're trying to get the answers and do the right thing, you're still paying a tax because there's either some quality, there's some trade-off. You're probably having to make quality or efficiency or cost or time or sanity or synthesis, right? You're asking good questions, but you have one quote and that's all. What happened to everything else? That's like the tax that you're paying for research. So I think just thinking about, if we assume and agree, which hopefully we all can as professionals, that we need some form of data and insights, doesn't have to be hard data, qualitative, it's extremely, if not more powerful at times. You have some sort of reason and insight and signal that tells you you need to do something. Corroborating that and getting more information is, there's better and faster ways to do it. We're in a world now where, again, like, you don't have to be handwriting notes all the time. You're at a loss if you're not typing and you're not texting or whatever else. The analogy holds here too. So I think just thinking through better and faster and cheaper ways to get information that you need. Don't feel like it has to be a once a quarter thing and a six-figure budget. There's easy ways. There's endless agile insights out there. There's so many sources now that I think the problem is just which is most useful and relevant for us. But don't let yourself be taxed.
I love that. I highly encourage you to. I bet you've already done this, but that's I feel like that's a LinkedIn post in the making right there. Is your
Well,
famous
that's a whole
research
other problem. If LinkedIn could show anybody's post, then more than probably the 100 people that saw it would. But it's somewhere on my LinkedIn.
tax. Cool. Well, Victoria, it's been so awesome talking to you. I had a total blast with this conversation. Everything you're doing over at Wonder is like just super cool, and again, like really innovative. I love how you're really sitting at the intersection of desk research, AI, working with some really big clients. So just really awesome stuff. Thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully we can do it again soon sometime.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks for the conversation.